Greetings. We're looking at a lesson about trade routes in the Eastern Hemisphere, and particularly at two words, choke point and break point. Because a choke point and a break point, these were the places that were strategically important at different eras in history, in the era of camels, dhows, galleys, and on up to today with supertankers and airplanes and so on. You probably want to print out and give your students a map either of the world or of the Eastern Hemisphere. They can write the place names on, or you can just make the version. Remember, you can make different versions of these maps from the clickable map. Helps to know where the Sahara is, that great big desert in North Africa, and where the cold forests of Siberia are. The British were awfully important in trade routes, so Britannia is a good place to remember, and Indonesia was the main target for trade, was to get to the Spice Islands and to bring that spices and tea back over toward Europe. So with a handful of place names like this, where Italy was and where the Black Sea was, and especially where the Mediterranean Sea was, we could take a look at the notion of breakpoints and choke points along these trade routes. So if you put the deserts here, you can see that a lot of the land trade routes, the red lines, deliberately went across the deserts because in an era of camels as the major way of carrying things, it was a lot easier to travel across a grassland or a desert than it was to go through a forest. So I gave you the two words, choke points and break points, because a choke point is a place where a ship or a caravan has to go through a narrow place, like a strait between two land areas or a pass between really high mountains. These are the places where, first of all the traffic had to go through there, so you needed things like, hotels, caravans, restaurants, places where people could eat, where they could camp, so on. It was also a strategically important place during a time of war because you could control trade going through there. Gibraltar is a classic example of a choke point, a place where ships had to go through a very narrow strait, and that's been an important place for thousands of years, from the Phoenician times right up to today's supertankers. Suez is in the news as a major choke point. And basically, your students should be just looking around in this map and trying to say, where do these trade routes get choked in between very narrow passes and so on? They might not know the words Bosporus and Dardanelles, but the city right there was really well known. I mean, it was called Byzantium for 1,000 years. Then it was called Constantinople for another half a millennium. Now we call it Istanbul. But in any case, it's at one of these major choke points. It is the place where a navy has to go through in order to get into the Black Sea to fight the war in Ukraine. Hormuz is in the news a lot as a choke point where oil tankers coming out of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait have to go by Iran. 21 million barrels of oil going through this strait every day. Straits of Malacca are historically important and tremendously important now. The town of Singapore is located where the people had to go through that choke point. The English Channel was a major choke point for shipping from Roman times up through World War II to today. Somalia is a major choke point for people coming out of the Red Sea. It's been a major arena for pirate activity for about 2,000 years. Some might still remember the movie about Captain Phillips. After your students have got a map full of these choke points, they might want to take a look at a map of breakpoint. A breakpoint is defined as a place where trade goods have to be transferred from one mode of transportation to another, like from a camel to a ship or from a ship to a train. Alexandria in northern Egypt was a major breakpoint for a couple thousand years, one of the biggest cities in the world for a long time. Canton, China, now Guangzhou uh, was a major breakpoint for trade to China uh, way back in Roman times. In fact, there was a huge Islamic section where the Arab traders from the Middle East would stop and do their trading in Canton, China. It was now the largest port in the world. Baghdad was a significant breakpoint for a long period of time. Crimea is a major breakpoint, uh, again, from Arab times all the way up to the present day conflict in Ukraine. Danzig, now called Gdansk, is, is a breakpoint in Northern Europe, part of the Hanseatic League. Tangier and Casablanca in Morocco were important breakpoints back in Roman times and today. Famous name for classic movie fans if you're into that kind of thing too. And then one that we've mentioned already in the religion units, Tarsus and Antioch were the key breakpoints for the Silk roads from China going to the shipping routes across the Mediterranean. And St. Paul came from Tarsus. And the last one I think I've got on my list here, Jeddah, which is the port of Mecca, is now as important. It's a famous name in religious history, and it handles as much traffic today as New York does. The Kerala area of southern India and the Shanghai area of northern China. That's the second largest port in the world. And to put it in perspective, it handles 8 times as much cargo as the New York port does. And the trading center of Timbuktu is a weird kind of breakpoint because you went from camels going across the desert to donkeys and other porters going along the river and maybe some river vessels there. Astrakhan on the northern edge of the Caspian Sea was an important breakpoint. And then finally, Dunhuang, where the Silk Road, you had to get off of the donkeys and other animals that were coming from China and onto camels to go across the Taklamakan Desert. Like I say, all of the maps that we've got, a printable version of the trade map, and copies of the breakpoints and choke points activities. All of this can be accessed at the website that you see on the screen right now. So you might check that out.